Representative Jasmine Crockett stood at the congressional hearing podium, her red blazer standing out against the traditional wood backdrop. Moments earlier, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh had delivered what many believed was a firm and unchallengeable defense of his disputed ruling. The room had grown quiet, reporters writing quickly, assuming the discussion was over. But Crockett, holding the microphone with steady focus, kept her gaze locked forward. She wasn't finished. Within 30 seconds, she challenged and dismantled Kavanaugh's argument so clearly that even some Republican senators struggled to hide their reactions. This wasn't just a response. It was the moment. Crockett turned a detailed legal exchange into a widely shared moment that would influence how many Americans viewed the Supreme Court. Before we continue with this key moment, take a second to like the video and subscribe so you can stay informed on our latest political coverage and updates. Tension filled the hearing room as Justice Brett Kavanaugh reviewed his notes at the witness table. Appointed to the Supreme Court during controversy in 2018, Kavanaugh had recently written a decision that sparked intense national discussion. His ruling, which sharply limited voting rights protections, had been praised by conservatives as faithful to constitutional text, yet criticized by progressives as excessive judicial intervention. Kavanaugh, armed with his Georgetown and Yale background, carried a calm and confident demeanor. He had endured tough confirmation hearings and now sat secure in a lifetime position. His testimony that morning had been precise and firm. The court cannot invent rights not expressly stated in the Constitution. Our duty is interpretation, not lawmaking. Across the chamber sat Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. At 42, Crockett was still relatively new to Congress, but she brought years of experience as a civil rights attorney. Unlike many long-term lawmakers, she had represented real clients in voting rights cases, people who felt the direct impact of rulings like Kavanaugh's. While other Democrats had questioned Kavanaugh with expected lines, Crockett stayed quiet, observing his tone and demeanor. Minutes earlier, her staff had handed her a folder containing late-night research that was not part of the official briefing. As her 5-minute questioning slot was announced, Republican members glanced at their phones, assuming she would repeat arguments already raised. But Crockett's team understood her goal. She wasn't there to perform. She had arrived prepared with Kavanaugh's own past statements that conflicted with his current ruling. The moment carried weight. With millions potentially facing increased voting barriers before the next election, this was more than routine procedure. It concerned the core American right to vote, and Crockett was prepared to reveal a contradiction that could shift the conversation in moments, not hours. Chairman Johnson called the chamber back into session. The chair recognizes Representative Crockett for 5 minutes. Kavanaugh sat upright, adjusting his tie. He had already handled 4 hours of questioning, responding calmly and avoiding missteps. He expected another familiar round. Crockett stepped forward, placing a slim folder on the podium. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Justice Kavanaugh. I appreciate you being here." Her tone was steady and restrained, a notable change from her usual energetic style. Reporters in the front row took notice. "Justice Kavanaugh, in your majority opinion last month, you wrote that implied voting protections cannot be interpreted into the Constitution where the text does not explicitly include them. Is that a fair summary of your position?" Kavanaugh nodded with assurance. "Yes, Representative. The Constitution's language must guide our decisions, not current preferences." Crockett continued, maintaining eye contact. "And you further noted that judicial restraint requires leaving expansions of rights to Congress, not the courts. Correct?" "That is correct. The separation of powers is essential to our system." Several Republican members nodded in agreement. The exchange appeared routine until the next moment. This appeared to be routine questioning. Crockett continued. "So your judicial philosophy, as demonstrated in this decision, is that rights not clearly listed in the Constitution cannot be created by the court. The text must be explicit and precise." "Yes, that's an accurate description," Kavanaugh answered, easing slightly in his chair. The room stayed still, reporters quietly observing, unsure where Crockett was leading with these straightforward confirmations. Then the tone shifted. Crockett opened a folder. "Justice Kavanaugh, I'm holding a copy of a legal article you published in the Georgetown Law Journal in 2008, before joining the federal bench. Would you like to review it?" A congressional aide handed the document to Kavanaugh. His eyebrows lifted a bit as he recognized it. In this article, Crockett began, you stated, and I quote, constitutional interpretation must evolve with the nation's understanding of liberty and equality. Where the text is unclear, judges have not only the authority but the responsibility to examine how core principles apply in modern contexts. A low reaction moved through the chamber. Kavanaugh's expression grew more rigid. Crockett continued, you also wrote that voting is the foundation of democracy and that courts should interpret election rules with a priority toward expanding voter participation. Kavanaugh attempted to respond. Representative, that piece was discussing a theoretical. I'm not finished, Justice Kavanaugh, Crockett said firmly. The atmosphere grew more focused. You additionally wrote that technical barriers to voting should be treated with strict scrutiny, as they may impose unconstitutional limits on essential rights. These are your words, correct? Silence filled the room. A slight flush appeared on Kavanaugh's face. The context of that article was different from, Crockett continued without hesitation. Justice Kavanaugh, did you write these statements? Yes, but so 15 years ago you argued courts should broadly protect voting access and participation. Yet on the Supreme Court your rulings have taken the opposite position. Democratic members leaned forward. Republican members shifted uneasily. No one had expected this angle. Kavanaugh tried to recover. Representative legal scholarship often reviews multiple viewpoints. As a justice, my responsibility is to, Crockett interrupted again, maintaining a steady tone. Justice Kavanaugh, I'm not asking about academic theory. I'm asking about consistency. You previously wrote strongly about safeguarding voting rights while pursuing academic honors, yet later issued decisions that restricted those same rights once you assumed judicial authority. So which Brett Kavanaugh should the public trust? The academic who supported democratic participation or the justice who narrowed it? Cameras tightened their focus as Kavanaugh's expression shifted. Quiet murmurs spread. Chairman Johnson tapped his gavel. Order. The justice will respond. Kavanaugh cleared his throat. Representative Crockett, my views have developed over time, as any judge's should. That article was written when I considered these matters as an academic, not as a... So you acknowledge that your stance has changed completely? Crockett cut in. I wouldn't describe it that way, Kavanaugh answered, sounding less certain than usual. Senator Graham leaned forward to speak softly to a colleague. Photographers continued snapping shots. Crockett proceeded, raising another document. Justice Kavanaugh, are you familiar with the amicus brief you helped draft in 1999 for the Washington Legal Foundation? Kavanaugh's face tightened slightly, clearly not anticipating the reference. In that brief, you stated that voting rights deserved the highest constitutional protection and that procedural barriers disproportionately affecting minority voters created serious 14th Amendment concerns. Yet your recent ruling directly departs from this principle. How do you justify these conflicting positions? The room became even more still. This was not a single inconsistency. This suggested a pattern. Democratic members exchanged glances. Even a few Republicans looked uneasy. Kavanaugh responded, Representative, legal advocacy, and judicial decision-making are not the same. When advocating, I represented the interests of clients. As a justice, so your principles shift depending on who you represent? Crockett asked, her tone steady but firm. The reaction in the room was immediate. Chairman Johnson struck his gavel again. The representative will avoid personal insinuations. Crockett nodded. I'll rephrase. Justice Kavanaugh, do you believe the public deserves consistent legal principles from judges, regardless of their role or authority? The question lingered as every attention turned to him. Naturally, consistency is important, he said carefully. But legal interpretation is complex, Mr. Chairman, Crockett said, now facing the cameras. My point has been made. I yield the balance of my time. The following half-minute of silence was striking. Kavanaugh sat rigidly, prepared talking points suddenly ineffective. Committee members sorted papers, avoiding his gaze. Reporters typed quickly in the gallery. What began as standard oversight quickly shifted into something much more significant. In just under 5 minutes, 30 seconds of which landed with unmistakable clarity, Crockett highlighted a major contradiction Kavanaugh could not resolve. As the recess began, the hearing room doors opened and lawmakers stepped out, reporters surrounding them immediately. A short break had turned into a media rush. Inside, Representative Jasmine Crockett calmly organized her materials, staying composed despite the chatter. Across the room, Justice Kavanaugh met quietly with his advisors, their tense discussion signaling concern. Efforts to respond had already started. A congressional correspondent from CNN reached Crockett first. Representative, was that exchange planned, or did it happen in the moment? Crockett paused, adjusting her red blazer. I simply came prepared with Justice Kavanaugh's own statements. The inconsistency is clear on its own, she said. Fox News stepped up next. Congresswoman, some critics say you blindsided Justice Kavanaugh unfairly. There's nothing unfair about asking public officials to stand by their own positions, she answered calmly. The public deserves clarity and consistency from the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Chairman Johnson was in a tense back and forth with committee leaders from both parties. The planned schedule had unraveled. Several Republican members insisted Kavanaugh should have more time to explain context around his earlier writings. In the hallway, Senator Elizabeth Warren greeted Crockett, briefly holding her hand. That was exceptional, Jasmine. His entire argument just fell apart. Crockett nodded. Sometimes you don't need long speeches, just facts. Nearby, phones vibrated as the first clip began spreading online. Crockett's 30-second question, which Brett Kavanaugh should the American people believe, had already been viewed 50,000 times within 3 minutes. The hashtag Auditor Crockett Receipts was trending nationwide. Back at the witness table, Kavanaugh's staff quickly passed him notes. His usual calm judicial tone had shifted, showing someone suddenly on defense. When the hearing resumed, his answers became more technical and dense with legal terms, a typical move to add complexity when confronted with a plain contradiction. As Kavanaugh attempted to reframe his stance, Representative Jim Jordan took the microphone. Justice Kavanaugh should be allowed to explain that academic writing is different from judicial rulings. That's an effort to distort the issue, the chair interrupted. The justice has already had the chance to respond. Kavanaugh leaned forward. If I may clarify, but the impact had already landed. His explanation about changing legal views sounded weak after Crockett's clear questioning. Even right-leaning commentators watching live struggled to defend the obvious conflict. Within half an hour, the clip reached platforms beyond politics. Entertainment outlets shared it. Athletes reposted it. The moment extended past party lines and tapped into something broader. The expectation that influential leaders must uphold their own standards. On MSNBC, the banner read, Crockett challenges Kavanaugh with his own words. Even Fox News analysts appeared divided. The questioning was sharp, one noted, but the facts are hard to deny. These quotes come directly from Justice Kavanaugh's prior statements. By the end of the hearing, 2 hours later, the exchange had been viewed more than 2 million times. University law professors were already assigning it as required viewing. Constitutional scholars were drafting rapid response analyses. The clip showed something rare in modern politics, a genuine moment of accountability. No raised voices, no theatrics. Just 30 seconds of direct, focused questioning that highlighted a contradiction so clear, no legal argument could blur it. As Representative Crockett exited the committee room with colleagues and aides, her phone rang. The caller ID read White House. The president had watched the exchange live and wanted to speak immediately. Representative Crockett, the president said once she answered in a private room. You explained the stakes of our judicial system in 30 seconds better than I've done in 30 speeches. Thank you, Mr. President, she replied. Sometimes the truth only needs one clear question. Outside, the crowd had grown. Citizens gathered on their own, holding quickly made signs. Crockett for justice. Which Kavanaugh do you believe? What started as a routine oversight hearing turned into a cultural moment. A rare occasion when political performance gave way to actual honesty. Crockett didn't simply earn political attention. She showed why judicial consistency matters for everyday Americans' rights. As the evening arrived, clips circulated rapidly online. Traditional media fell behind as social media users shared the moment organically. People who rarely discussed court decisions were suddenly engaged and commenting. Later in her office, Crockett received a handwritten note delivered by a Supreme Court clerk. The message was short. Effectively argued, counselor. The questions deserve better answers than I gave today. BK. She placed the note in her folder, calm and unsurprised. The goal had never been to embarrass Justice Kavanaugh. It was to reveal how power can shift principles. By nightfall, the 30-second clip had surpassed 10 million views. The top comment read, "This is what accountability looks like." Dawn rose over the Capitol as news broadcast across the country led with the same headline. Crockett's questioning of Kavanaugh becomes the most viewed congressional clip in history. Overnight numbers were extraordinary. The 30-second exchange had been viewed more than 75 million times across platforms, translated into 28 languages, generating over 200,000 comments and global legal analysis. At coffee shops and breakfast tables nationwide, people who rarely talked about Supreme Court decisions were debating the importance of judicial consistency. Complex legal topics had become accessible through Crockett's simple approach. Principles apply no matter who holds power, or they do not. Morning shows rushed to book her for interviews, but her office turned them all down with one brief message. Representative Crockett believes Justice Kavanaugh's words speak for themselves. She has nothing further to add. The decision only increased interest. Instead of seeking attention, Crockett's silence kept focus on the substance of the moment, not personality or politics. At the Supreme Court, Justice Kavanaugh entered through the underground garage, avoiding protesters gathered overnight. Signs asked, "Which Kavanaugh?" Law students from Georgetown, Howard, and American University stood in silence while reading his conflicting past writings. Inside staff noticed an unusual tone. While justices typically maintain civility despite differences, that morning's conference was canceled. Chief Justice Roberts instead requested private meetings with each justice. By midday, legal experts released deeper commentary. Harvard Law Review issued a special digital edition analyzing the contradiction. Yale Law School announced a symposium titled Consistency in the Court. Conservative legal organizations moved quickly to support Kavanaugh. The Federalist Society issued a statement asserting that a judge's views can naturally develop with experience and responsibility. However, even they admitted that the particular inconsistencies on voting rights were difficult to explain without additional context. Just before midday, a surprising event unfolded. 3 other justices released an unusual joint statement, stressing the importance of protecting public trust and consistent judicial reasoning. Without mentioning Kavanaugh by name, Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Barrett noted that shifts in legal philosophy should be openly stated and clearly justified. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board described the move as an extraordinary break in normal court decorum, while the Washington Post called it a needed step to help maintain institutional integrity. Activity continued on Capitol Hill. Senator Mitch McConnell, who had helped guide Kavanaugh's confirmation, declined to respond to press questions. In contrast, Senator Chuck Schumer introduced legislation aimed at strengthening Supreme Court ethics rules, including requiring justices to explain major changes from their previously stated legal opinions. By the afternoon, the issue had moved beyond political circles and entered mainstream culture. Late-night shows began preparing sketches. Documentary producers asked for permission to use the hearing footage. Law schools reported an increase in applications, with admissions officers noting essays referencing the Crockett effect. The most meaningful shift, however, occurred outside Washington. In states considering voting limits, lawmakers temporarily halted movement. The contradictions highlighted by Crockett made it harder to justify restrictions based on Kavanaugh's logic. In Georgia, a state senator who once supported such measures told reporters, "When someone's principles change dramatically after gaining power, it makes you rethink your own stance." Professional legal groups weighed in. The American Bar Association created a special panel on consistency in judicial reasoning. Law schools reported a sharp rise in interest in civil rights programs. Online social media platforms struggled to manage the volume of discussion. A hashtag involving Kavanaugh surpassed 15 million uses. Everyday citizens shared personal voting-related experiences alongside the video clip. What started as a technical legal exchange had grown into a nationwide conversation about consistency, authority, and rights. By evening, the White House clarified its view. In a carefully worded statement, the president remarked, "When the Supreme Court makes decisions affecting core rights, Americans deserve assurance that those decisions are based on consistent legal reasoning. not changing political pressures. Constitutional scholars noted it was the most direct comment from a president on Supreme Court reasoning in years, while still respecting the judiciary's independence. As night arrived, another layer emerged. Citizens organized consistency rallies nationwide. These events were not traditional partisan protests. Instead, participants called for public leaders to explain major shifts in their stated beliefs. In Texas, Crockett's home state, large crowds gathered outside the state capitol. People from both political sides attended, united by a shared expectation of consistency from judges and elected officials. 1 week after the hearing, something unprecedented happened. Justice Kavanaugh asked to release a supplemental explanation for his voting rights opinion. In a 15-page document, he recognized the contradictions Crockett pointed out and outlined how his thinking had developed. While defending his decision, he admitted he should have directly addressed his earlier positions instead of appearing to overlook them. Legal scholars labeled it groundbreaking, the first time in modern history that a justice issued such a clarification in response to public critique. Crockett then released a short statement. She said Justice Kavanaugh's willingness to explain his evolution demonstrated respect for the public. She added that transparency strengthens institutions, even when people disagree with the results. Her measured response further elevated her reputation as a thoughtful constitutional voice rather than a partisan figure. 2 weeks after the hearing, polling showed a meaningful change. 67% of Americans, including most Democrats and Republicans, believed Supreme Court justices should explain significant departures from earlier legal views. Law schools reported more than a 30% rise in applications focused on constitutional and civil rights studies. Many young applicants cited Crockett as proof that legal knowledge can drive accountability. A month later, the effects continued. 3 state Supreme Courts, referencing the national debate on judicial consistency, issued unusually detailed explanations for opinions that moved away from prior rulings. Senator Schumer's ethics bill attracted surprising bipartisan backing, with several Republicans supporting stronger transparency to enhance public confidence. Civil rights groups noted record-breaking donations, with many supporters referencing the Crockett-Kavanaugh exchange as motivation. Voter registration campaigns saw historic engagement, especially among younger Americans and communities historically affected by voting barriers. Perhaps most notably, other lawmakers adopted Crockett's style. Congressional hearings shifted from routine speeches to more direct accountability. Members of Congress from both parties came prepared with documented records and prior statements instead of rehearsed talking points. 6 months later, while Crockett walked through Dallas's Oak Cliff neighborhood where her legal career began, a woman approached her. "My daughter is starting law school because of you," she said. She watched that moment and realized the law isn't just complex language. It's about holding people to what they say. Crockett smiled and replied, "Tell her to keep the receipts." This exchange captured the heart of the moment. In 30 seconds of focused questioning, Crockett showed that accountability does not require authority, wealth, or a long speech, only preparation, clarity, and the willingness to ask a direct question. The story of Jasmine Crockett's challenge to Justice Kavanaugh moved beyond party politics and became a lasting lesson in democratic accountability. It reminded the public that consistency matters, principles should not shift with power, and sometimes the most effective challenge to authority comes from simply reflecting its contradictions back to it. A year later, as Crockett accepted the American Bar Association's new Constitutional Courage Award, she reflected on the moment. "I didn't try to create a viral clip," she said. "I believed that if Justice Kavanaugh's words mattered when he first wrote them, they should matter when they become inconvenient. Consistency isn't partisan, it's central to the rule of law." The audience stood in applause as screens replayed the moment, a calm, direct question that still echoes across American institutions. Which version should we believe? If you found this breakdown useful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you thoughtful coverage of major political developments shaping our democracy. Turn on notifications to stay updated, and share this video to continue the discussion on judicial accountability. Your support enables us to provide deeper context behind today's headlines.